Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so thrilled to welcome you all to the Digital Humanities Center. I'm Jessica Pressman. I'm a professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature, and I'm co-founder, where's Joanna? With Joanna Brooks, who is somewhere, of the Digital Humanities Initiative. And it's just a thrill to have you all here. I want to begin by thanking the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters, there's Joanna Brooks, co-founder, the HUMTech Initiative in the College of Arts and Letters. I also want to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature, the Living Writers Program, for their support, and of course, the Digital Humanities Center, and especially Pam and Patrick, who have set up this space and created this beautiful video of some of Amaranth's work so you can get a taste of what you're gonna hear and see. This space, the Digital Humanities Center, is the home of innovation and experimentation, and also of born digital literature and literary studies. And I invite you all to come see our electronic literature studio, which was created by students, including our own Joey King. It's a wonderful space and archive of electronic literature, including Amaranth's work. So please do go check that out. Our key texts in there include Amaranth's Between Page and Screen, which is right up there. So come see. All right, now the reason we're all here. And let me say also, the eLit, we have an annual competition of student-made electronic literature. Some of the work is on display in there, and if you look around, you'll see posters from past events. So I hope if anyone creates born digital literature of any type of genre, that you will submit and be showcased here. All right, yay. Amaranth Borsuk is here today, and she is a scholar, a poet, and a digital artist, and I am thrilled because Amaranth was supposed to come in March of 2020. The poster is on the wall in there. If you go in the eLit studio, there's posters of the last 10 years of our events and labor, and Amaranth's face is on the wall from 6 years ago, and she is here today. She is the author of the book from MIT Press, which many of you in the audience have read in my classes, a fabulous history of the book. She is the author of Wash, which many of you in Megan Marshall's class are reading now, a work of speculative poetry, and many other works of digital poetry, including Between Page and Screen with Brad Boos, which I've spent a lot of time reading and teaching, and many others. And in addition to paper-based and digital work, installations, performance art, many collaborations. Amaranth has a PhD in literature and creative writing from USC, from that really prestigious, fabulous program. She was a Mellon postdoctoral fellow in comparative media studies and writing and humanistic studies at MIT. And she's currently associate professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington, Bothell. She is speaking tomorrow in our Living Writers series upstairs as our first digital poet. I'm so thrilled about that. So I just want a personal introduction, though, which is that I'm a scholar of electronic literature. As many of you know, I teach it, I write on it. And I'm a huge fan of Amaranth Borsuk. I hold her in very high esteem. I spent years reading Between Page and Screen, some of the videos captured up there, writing about it, talking about it. It has a central part in my bookishness book and in my heart. And indeed, when we were building digital humanities here and electronic literature here at San Diego State, she was one of the first people that I wanted to bring. And we tried, and now she's here. So I'm a great admirer. And every time that I teach Between Page and Screen or the book in my classes, this book, I just want to say one thing. This is a history of the book that I now exclusively teach that includes these wonderful pages, these black pages in which she quotes from other scholars, including myself, which made me really happy, which is a a kind of testament to the way she works. She works collaboratively. She works experimentally. She works in human entanglements, not just with machines, but always with people, not just in citations, but in risky experimentation and collaborations that are creative across bodies of media and people. She considers how bodies of humans and media matter in connection rather than opposition, in entangled relationships, what I hope we'll talk about later. She's a poet and a pioneer, and I'm honored and just very glad to have her here finally. So please join me in welcoming Amaranth Borsuk to San Diego State.
It is such an honor to be here today. I really can't believe that it was 6 years ago that I was supposed to be here. Nothing has changed in the last 6 years, except everything. And I'm really deeply grateful to Jessica, who has been an important figure for me. It's one of the reasons that I surround the book with the voices of other thinkers. When you are doing this kind of work, over time, you hear these other voices in your head. They become your interlocutors. You're measuring your thought against their thought. And hers is one of the voices that is always in my mind as I'm doing both my creative and my scholarly work. So it's really a huge honor to me to be here. I also appreciate the framing of the central HumTech question. What does it mean to be human in a digital future? I call this talk The Book Transforms because I think that the transformative nature of books is central to the idea of what makes us human. Books can transform us, both individually and collectively, and books themselves have transformed over time and across cultures and will continue to do so. This makes them ripe for literary and artistic expression and experimentation as rich artifacts of our humanity, whether they've been penned by medieval scribes or composed computationally. As an artist and a poet, I've been making work that investigates the interactive, material, and computational aspects of the book for more than a decade. And this perspective directly informed my writing of the book for MIT Press. So today I'm going to share a little bit of both, the questions that preoccupy my creative work and the through line of the book. Of course, when I say book, what we picture is going to vary from person to person in this room. Book is an idea that has a lot of baggage. Maybe you think of it in terms of its content, a book of poems, a novel, a biography, or maybe you think of it in terms of an object that looks something like this: a stack of pages, printed on both sides, bound on one end and encased between covers. We use the term interchangeably to refer to both. But this object is so ubiquitous and has been naturalized to such a degree that often we don't even notice its form. And this is particularly true for any of us who grew up being able to access the same book as a paperback, a hardcover, an audiobook, perhaps even an ebook or online text. But while this shape, the codex, has had a long and vibrant history, it's also not the only form in which language has been recorded. In fact, it's preceded by more than 2,000 years of different forms that each culture has found for recording and sharing information. These are just a few of the many physical forms that the book has taken for recording information over time. And in every case, the book changes shape with the materials that are available, the needs of the writers and readers of the culture in which it arises, and the political and social climate. My own definition of the book, for myself, needs to be capacious enough to include these other forms because I think they have something to teach us about what is essential to a book, and what a book does or can do. So my definition, for the purposes of our time together today, is a book is a portable information storage and retrieval device, a material form for the dissemination of text. And I don't say this is the only definition or even the right definition, but it's one that's been useful to me in my creative practice and in my thinking about where books have been and where they're headed. The book has changed over time, and as I've said, it's going to continue to do so, but in every case, it is always both, form, and content, even in its digital form. So for me, essential knowledge about the book requires an understanding of that shape-shifting history. So the book starts by looking at how the object of the book came to be and exploring many of the forms you saw in those illustrations. It then explores the book's transformation into content from a material artifact to what goes into that artifact through the development of technologies that allow for mechanical reproduction of books on a massive scale. That process leads to text being privileged over the book's form as both a commodity and as intellectual property. In the third chapter, I turn to experiments by book artists of the 20th and 21st centuries that draw attention to the idea of the book to explore the ways that books have always been interactive artifacts whose form and content influence our experience of them. And then in the last chapter, I outline the way a book can thus be seen as an interface through which we encounter text, which becomes evident through the consideration of the many digitization projects starting in the 1970s that made it possible for us to experience books in electronic form. And in the time since this book came out in 2018, even that landscape has changed dramatically thanks to the mass popularity of generative AI, which wasn't at all in everyone's pocket in 2018, and I think is continuing to restructure how we think about what text is, what genius is, what language can do, and what a book might look like. One of the things that my research into the book has shown me is that all books, whether a rare bound volume like the one you see here, or an ebook on a Kindle, the interface through which we read is a kind of body. And that body interacts with the reader's body. And we can't pretend that a book is simply content that can be poured into any form and remain the same. The physical form fundamentally impacts the work's meaning, like in this chansonnier, which is when it's closed, it looks like a heart that's bound in red velvet. It seems very sumptuous. It's full of love songs, and then when you open it, you're holding two hearts in your hands. It's sort of conveying this notion of love in its very shape. I'm particularly interested in experiments like this one, which is, from the 15th century, in which the form and the content are intertwined. And in my own work, I look for ways to explore this intersection, particularly as it relates to the relationship between print and digital media. For this reason, I find artists' books to be a really rich terrain for thinking about the book's transformation, because they draw so much attention to the book's body. As you see in this book by Alison Knowles from 1967 called The Big Book, this is a book that readers have to navigate by climbing and crawling, going up a ladder. In order to turn those gigantic pages, they actually have to use their whole body. And because basically the book is so large and it's been expanded so much, you come to realize that the work's reading only arises from your traversal of it. You actually have to become the text and move from page to page in order to make meaning of this book that includes a bathroom, a kitchen, a library, an art gallery. It's really a book to live in. I think that when you do this to a book, when you make it no longer portable, you make us see that the book has a body at all, because we're experiencing it with our own body, and reading becomes a bodily act. So no two readers are going to have the same experience of this book. And she's also exploiting the fact that the codex is serial. When things are bound, they are generally traversed in a linear order. But of course, there's also the possibility of random access. It just becomes much harder on this scale. So in my own practice, when I make a book, I try to consider the way the work's form and content are in dialogue and to see what that conversation can teach me. In 2012, Brad Baus and I collaborated on Between Page and Screen. This is a book of poems that contains no text, only black and white geometric shapes like the one you see on the cover, and the instructions to find the words visit betweenpageandscreen.com. At the website, if the reader follows the instructions to show the book to their webcam, and it sounds like many people in this room already have, but you can see it in the room next door. When you do that, that's when the poems appear. The poems are a series of love letters between two characters, P and S, pushing at the boundaries of their relationship. They explore the etymologies of the words page and screen and use them to try to understand how we might envision a place for both modalities rather than having to choose between them. It uses marker-based augmented reality to create the illusion of a digital pop-up book. So the words don't exist on either platform. The books are not in the page and they are not in the screen. They're in that space between them that gets opened up by the reader. They can't exist without both interfaces and without that human intervention. At the time I made this book, I was completing my PhD in modernist poetry and electronic literature, and I found myself shuttling back and forth between archival research and research online and digital sources. And the language at that time around the death of the book was everywhere because of the advent of the Kindle and iPhone in 2007 and then the iPad in 2010. So there were articles coming out all the time, the book is dead, e-readers are the future, the Kindle foretells the death of the book. But the dichotomy between print and digital that was being created really didn't sit right with me. And so I wanted to explore the relationship between the two. And when I saw this marker-based AR technology, it seemed to me like a helpful metaphor for me to ask myself some of those questions because it requires both. So it kind of let me explore that space. And although I started this project to better understand my own feelings of being torn between print and digital media by seeking their merger, it also gave me an incredible object lesson in what an artist's book is. It's an experience constructed by an artist and activated by a reader, which in turn, of course, reminded me that all books are shaped by their reader. And no matter what an author may think about their intentions for any given publication, that work's meaning always arises in that moment when the reader comes to the text. In this case, the reader's body, their memories, their emotions, their identities, all of that shapes the work's meaning for them. And that's always the case, but when the camera is on, you actually have to see it. This is one of the features that print and digital books have in common, and it's something that fascinates me. My work probes that space where digital becomes material and where the reader's role in shaping the text comes to the foreground. Another element that keeps coming up for me is instability and ephemerality, text that disappears, that changes, or that is destroyed through the act of reading. I'm interested in the ephemerality of both print and digital media, each of which seem to offer the promise of the archive and the idea that the digital might last forever, or that libraries are the perfect place to store and retain information in perpetuity, but that in reality both are incredibly vulnerable to loss. This is something that I write about in the book, how books are subject to censorship and destruction, often with the aim of obliterating all memory and trace of the people those books represent, how their bodies, the book's bodies, like our bodies, are vulnerable, and how digital media, too, can be corrupted, made obsolete, lost, or destroyed as technologies change. This project, Whispering Galleries, was created as a site-specific text work for the City of New Haven's public libraries. When visitors arrived at the library, they would see a large screen like the ones you see here, and they would encounter their own reflection distorted in a kind of curve on that screen, and floating in front of them, a text made out of particles of dust. That text comes from the diary of an anonymous shopkeeper who lived and worked in the area in 1858. His daily life was measured out by hand, whether at work or at rest. He played the violin, he wrote music, he made axe handles, and he swept out his shop every day, and he records all of that in detail. This project, which was another collaboration with Brad Baus, invited visitors to sweep the dust from the screen, revealing erasure poems that were hidden within it. Poems that bring out the hand as a character and invite the reader to see their own hand in a lineage with this unknown ancestor. The project uses the metaphor of the architectural Whispering Gallery, which many of you have probably been in one. I have not even checked. The dome of your library here might even act as a Whispering Gallery, but basically a domed space where people at opposite ends of the room can whisper and hear each other clearly because of the way sound travels across that dome. We were thinking about the library as a space where you have to talk in whispers, but also a place where you can access whispers from the past with any book that you pick up. We used the infrared dome projected above the Leap Motion controller you see here that looks kind of like a pack of gum on the pedestal to allow visitors to manipulate the text on screen. Like the anonymous diary keeper, their hands could make music, sweep the dust, and reach across time through language. This project, Abra, a collaboration with Kate Durbin and Ian Hatcher, also explores the role of the hand in the reading interface. It started as a page-based collaboration with Kate Durbin, in which we wrote poems and interwove them to create a text that mutates and grows as you turn the pages, eventually crossing the gutter to merge with an image on the facing page that grows towards it. It emerged from a feminist practice of decentering solo authorship and the history of the lyric voice. We were very lucky to have this book published by San Diego Press 1913 and make this basically flip book animation come to life in the reader's hands. We loved the idea that the text could exceed either of our intentions for it, which is why we purposefully wove it together, but we especially wanted to know what could happen if the reader could change the text as well. We were lucky enough to receive a grant from the Center for Book and Paper Arts in Chicago to create what they called an expanded artist's book, which incorporated both a limited edition book and a free iPad and iPhone app that would bring the reader's participation into the text transformation. Our goal with the artist's book was to make the page and the iPad into one continuous touchscreen interface, reminding readers of the book's body and their own. So we used a number of techniques to do that. There's blind letterpress printing that you can only detect if you touch the surface of the page. There are laser cut openings that reveal what's on the page below. There's even heat-sensitive ink that disappears with the heat of your hands or your breath on the page. And then as you turn the pages, all of these little cut pieces coalesce into a circular opening at the center of the book that gradually widens so that you can see and begin interacting with an iPad that's been inserted in the back of the book, on which the same text is available, but it is already mutating, and as soon as you touch it, begins to change. In the app, further interaction becomes possible. Readers can add text to Abra's lexicon. They can add emoji. They can manipulate and transform and erase and prune and really make the text their own. And we wanted to celebrate the fact that all texts belong to the reader by making that mutability palpable. Each of these collaborations allowed me to think broadly about what books can be and do and how books shape themselves to and are shaped by their readers. This project, A Book of Dust, which is forthcoming in Poetry International, furthered that imaginative process. This is a different sort of collaboration. Conceptually, it's an outgrowth of a class that I teach at UW-Bothell. It's an advanced undergraduate poetry workshop called Chapbooks and Artist Books. And in that class, I ask students to make a chapbook every week. We read chapbooks. We talk about the chapbook as a form for long poems, for fragmentation, and for experimentation. And one of the assignments I give students in that class is to come up with 5 imaginary books every week. Books that are impossible to create or whimsical or that challenge in some way their sense of what a book might be. And in particular, we get inspired by Yoko Ono's book Grapefruit and the notion of the Fluxus tradition of the event score. What would happen if, like an event score, you could write the instructions for a book, and then that book doesn't have to ever exist because it's been performed in the mind of its reader. So as I was doing this work with my students, I started to imagine for myself, what would my imaginary books be? This project is based on Nick Montfort's re-implementation of Alison Knowles and James Tenney's House of Dust. As you could see, Alison Knowles is a real touchstone for me and a major source of inspiration. And this work is actually a really important early work of electronic literature that until the past 15 years or so wasn't canonized in quite the way one might have expected. while I didn't work directly with Nick on this project, working with his code, which he makes freely available and encourage others to do, really felt like a collaboration. He's also a dear friend and someone with whom I'm in regular contact. So just the very act of tinkering with his code felt like being in dialogue with someone that I care about. So it's based on House of Dust, which was this poem generator that Knowles and Tenney created in 1967. And the way that their collaboration worked was it generates these descriptions of imaginary houses using this specific structure. A house of material in a location using a light source inhabited by inhabitants. And everywhere you see parentheses, Knowles came up with a list of words that could be substituted into that sentence, kind of like a Mad Lib. But while she may have generated these lexicons to input into the text, she didn't know what was going to come out once the code was run. One of the things that amazes me about this project is that it was a computer poem, but it was also a limited edition artist book, which you see a print of in the background here, which was composed of selections from the print feed that was output by the computer. And then in 1969, it actually became a physical structure. So she actually built structures that were based on what was generated by her poetry generator. And although it was shortly destroyed after its first building in Chelsea, she rebuilt it at CalArts. I think of this as a differential project. It exists simultaneously in multiple forms, none of which is the central or most important ones. They each do something different and can be experienced completely differently by a reader. And this is an important touchstone for me for the kind of works that I make, which encompass print, digital, limited edition, installation, open source, democratic multiple. So my text generator borrows Knowles' structure and Montfort's code to create these descriptions that draw from a limited source to create dynamic and unexpected juxtapositions, like a book of lyrics with the sound of waves made from pages read by you, a book of repressed desires in the discard pile, made from fairy tales, read by mongrel poets, a book of collages in dos-a-dos, made from fairy tales, read by smell. What I love about working in books, and the reason that I think artist books are such an important object of study for anyone who wants to understand what a book is and can do, is that because they always in some way interrogate their material form, they make embodiment central to the reading experience, reminding us of the body of the book and of the reader and of that performative moment where the two meet, as in this work Pry, which is also on display in the gallery, in which in order to read, you're actually pinching open a character's eyes in order to look deeper into his subconscious and also to see the world through his eyes in a very visually compelling, fragmentary, and elusive storyline. Because of the way that I'm thinking about the artist book, I really see it encompassing both print and digital works like this one, because they remind us that the book has always been an interactive medium. So I want to share with you a few features that physical books have in common with digital ones, using artist books as my primary examples. And I wouldn't say that every work of electronic literature is, or every, say, ebook is an artist book, but I would say most works of electronic literature are artist books because of their interrogation of their form. So one technology we might think of as extremely digital and contemporary is virtual reality. And in the book, one of the things that I talk about is the way even an artist book can be a kind of virtual reality. And this is a quote from Ulises Carrion's very famous manifesto, which was published in Plural. It was called The New Art of Making Books, and it was published in a literary journal. It was really aimed at literary authors in Mexico of his time to shake them out of the idea that the author was more important than the bookmaker, and that the text was more important than the reader. And instead of thinking of a book as the dissemination of a work of authorial genius that is bestowed upon an audience, he was really enjoining authors to take an active role in envisioning their work from start to finish, thinking about the paper, thinking about how it looks on the page, thinking about sequence, and really creating a full-bodied experience for the reader. So he says, a book is a sequence of spaces. Each of these spaces is perceived at a different moment. A book is also a sequence of moments. A book is not a case of words, nor a bag of words, nor a bearer of words. And even though he had been a successful fiction writer and he had won awards for his writing, he really wanted to take this turn based on what he was seeing in the conceptual art of the time, people embracing mail art and reproduction of books and artworks outside of the gallery system, and the creation of artist-run spaces like his bookstore, Other Books and So in Amsterdam. So this is my example of a virtual reality book. It is a peep show book that was produced as a souvenir for the digging of the tunnel under the Thames, which opened in 1851. The this book form is known to book artists as a tunnel book, and it gets its name probably from this example, which is a series of frames which are connected by an accordion, and when looked at through that central hole, basically put on a stage show for an audience of one. You're seeing these different layers and getting a sense of the depth of that tunnel that goes under the Thames. It's a form that originates in the Italian Renaissance. It's an old form, the peep show, and yet it is also a really beautiful approximation of the notion of creating the three-dimensional within a two-dimensional space. So I also love the idea that you could imagine kind of holding this up to your face, right? And kaleidoscoping it out and experiencing that feeling of depth and of going someplace, maybe you visited the tunnel when it first opened, but then you can revisit it from the comforts of your home, just as you might, visit Kilimanjaro in your VR glasses or something. The bound book has sequence and depth, and the two-page spread can be manipulated to be filmic, so it's a lot like a flip book, which was patented in, that's not playing for you, huh? Let me see if I can get that. There we go. So the flip book was patented in 1868 as a moving image precursor to film, and the earliest, cinematic forms we have are these rotating flipped cards that activate our sense of persistence of vision and create the feeling of motion. And here you see Michael Snow exploiting that in his book Cover to Cover, where turning the pages creates a whole narrative about an artist who leaves his apartment and goes to a gallery, takes a drive, and eventually comes home again. And it really becomes a kind of movie that you're watching without any text. Books also have the capacity to be nonlinear just as much as electronic literature does. They're remixable. So on the left, you have an example of a Volvel, an early recombinant tool for calculation and navigation, here being used for astrological charts. You could turn that central wheel and see different alignments and read different texts that way. And then on the right, Raymond Queneau's 100 000 milliards de poèmes, 100,000 billion poems, which is 10 Petrarchan sonnets that have been cut so that each line is separate and can be flipped one at a time to create 10 to the 14th power different sonnets. No one's ever going to read all of those sonnets. The point isn't to read them, it's to know that they're possible or potential, which sounds very much like a program for generating text, right? And as we've been talking about, because the book has a body like ours, it is ephemeral and subject to decay and destruction, whether by moisture, fire, or even insects. There really are bookworms, and they really do digest parts of paper. Books are also, of course, subject to censorship and destruction. And here you see Diderot's, one example of his series Literaturwurst. He's a German artist who escaped to Switzerland as a boy during the Second World War. And in this series, he would take books that he wasn't fond of, philosophers like Marx and Hegel, as well as tabloid magazines and newspapers. He would cook them into a pulp using his mother's sausage recipes and actually encase them in skin casings like sausages. So it seems to me like he's playing with the notion of posterity, right? You preserve meat into a sausage, and yet by preserving these texts, he's making them completely unreadable. Not only that, but if you think about it, like the shelf life of a sausage might be 6 weeks without refrigeration, and then it's gross. And so he's also playing with the conservators who have the task of trying to both maintain this work and prevent it from disturbing anything else in their collections that might be nearby. So as I mentioned earlier, the ephemerality of the book has been a recurring theme in my work, but I really didn't know it at the time. It's one of those things that it's taken me many years of iterating and making work to see why I am obsessed with the things that I am obsessed with. And it's in both my individual work and in my collaborative work, like this artist book, Sunt Lacrimae Rerum, in which the text on the facing pages is a word ladder poem. It only changes by one letter on every page. But when the accordion book is closed and reopened, the letters are prone to tangle with one another and potentially tear off the page, implicating the reader in the process of transforming and eventually destroying the text. And it is a text about grief. These are the tears of things is the translation of the title, and it is about loss and how we memorialize loss. So I'm interested in that ephemerality and in the ways in which the reader's interaction fundamentally changes the text. This is a volvel that I created in collaboration with my friend and colleague, Carrie Bodel, in which we created a lunar volvel that allows readers to create poems that they can view through the holes in the lunar landscape. So I received another really important object lesson about the book last autumn when lightning struck the roof of our house, burning its way into my office and finding the perfect fuel in my accumulated books, ephemera, and archive. As someone who's thought a lot about what the book is as a material object, I knew books were ephemeral, and I've mentioned it many times in the course of this talk. For a long time, I was able to think about that from an intellectual standpoint, even dispassionately. When I created Between Page and Screen, I was content to imagine that that work was going to become obsolete when Flash was eventually going to be no longer functioning, right? With the advent of the iPad and the iPhone and Apple saying, we're not supporting Flash, we knew there was a limited time for Between Page and Screen. And I actually kind of loved the idea that what would be left was this physical book that you couldn't read but had these mysterious shapes in it, like concrete poetry or a visual artist's book. I even loved the idea that what would be left would be the performance of the book, right? Readers' memories and experiences of it, video documentation, a lot like a Fluxus artwork or something Alison Knowles would have done. But not having access to my personal library has forced me to think much more concretely about the relationship between the body of the book and the body of the reader, particularly the relationship of my own body to my books. The books you see here were directly to the right of my writing desk, ready to hand for easy consultation. Mixed in among them were handwritten annotations. Some of them were inscribed. Sandra and Ben, that's where your book was. Jessica, your book was on the other side. And above them, you can see a collection of my talismans that had deep personal meaning. My grandmother's spice box and her pin cushion, a Tibetan singing bowl that I bought in college, inspired by my first poetry mentor, Olga Brumis, who was a Buddhist, and other trinkets that were meaningful to me. The book is always exceeding, slipping past, challenging any boundaries that I seem to create for it, and this is one of the things that I love about it. It keeps me invested in both print and digital media as portable information storage and retrieval devices. While the book is activated by the reader, I'm coming to realize that my books had meaning for me even when I wasn't actively consulting them. They were also talismans surrounding me as I wrote and researched. My collection of contemporary poetry amassed from high school onward when I was a budding poet, trolling the library, looking for anything cool or interesting in the poetry stacks. It was a kind of mirror in which I could see my past selves distorted and brush the dust from those pages to meet the poets that I loved and the poets that I once was. The inscriptions within them directly connected me to specific readings, bookstores, celebrations, and moments in time. What I'm coming to realize is that each book represents a relationship, and what I have lost is not the material value of each volume, though those are gone. The books themselves, many of them can be replaced. Many are still in print, some of them are available through used bookstores. Thanks to being able to buy used books online, there is actually a lot of possibility to find some of these things. The artist books that I collected, I will now most likely have to visit in research libraries and collections. And some of my own destroyed or partially destroyed books I'm holding on to for now as like weirdly beautiful, kind of grotesque artifacts. But I'm struggling with whether buying a new copy of the same book will really fill the gap in my archive. And many people have asked me, should I send you my books? Do you want books? Are you buying books? And my father, who is a collector, would love nothing more than to send me boxes and boxes of books. I'm not ready because it doesn't feel sufficient. It feels a little transactional to just replace those books because the books aren't just objects to me. They accrue meaning through interaction and exchange, through marginalia and memory. Where, when, how did I get this book? From whom, with whom, who signed it, when did I first read it? And what traces might I have left on those pages? And that's Abra, both wet and also charred. As I look at the boxes of ruined books that I salvaged from the fire, and although I did throw a lot away in the early days after the fire because it seemed so irretrievable, I did save many things in the following week when I kind of got my bearings after the initial shock. Most of them are illegible, saturated, burned, and many are growing spores in various colors, which is making me notice the ways in which salvage and collection and preservation have always been part of my practice, as is the trace, because whatever grows on those books is a trace of something that was on there before and that just needed the right environment to bloom. I know that conservation of those books is impossible. What I'm doing with them at this point doesn't look like conservation, but it is a kind of digging through the ashes. Here's an image of my hand after digging through the rubble, and I tore a couple of fingers off of one of my rubber gloves by accident. So I like this image because I'm coated in dust and rubble, and I'm also reminded that the book has always been both manual and digital, right? Obviously the digit refers to the finger too. And this is a quote from Garrett Stewart, one of those pull quotes that for me was so important to have in the book as a way of kind of binding myself to other thinkers. And I didn't know it at the time that I was making this gesture in the book, but it was really important to me to honor these voices. And when he says, from scroll to bound folio, books have indeed evolved, and like all things subject to evolution, they can face extinction. That quote means a lot more to me now than it did before. So this is a quote from a project. When I was working on the book and including all of these quotes from other writers, it struck me that there were so many other people whose definitions of the book I wanted to know, and that I didn't have the opportunity to ask, and I didn't have the space or wherewithal to produce. So I reached out to more than 100 artists, writers, librarians, book artists, to ask them, what is a book to you, in as few or as many words as you want. Those were initially published on a website and then bound into an artist book called The Book, 101 Definitions. And it was another attempt to bind people together around this idea. And I hope that when we separate today, you'll each think about what your idea of a book is, how it relates to your body, your humanness, your relationship to technology. And I'll leave you with just a few folks whose definitions have been resonating for me. Jason Dodge said, "I think a book is where we explore the magical space between eyes and a bent arm." I like the visual dance of that. Anne Hamilton, a visual artist for whom the hand has been really a critical aspect of her work, says, "A book is where the far away meets the near at hand, the tea cooling on the table, the hard seat of the chair, the horn sounding outside the window." The artist Indira Allegra, who's also a book artist and weaver, says, "The book is a time travel device, allowing us to slip into the imagination of a future mind." Travis Schaffer says the book is a dislocation device. Travis is a risograph artist and artist book publisher. And book artist Sarah Bodman says the book is a magic portal. I don't know where my magic portal is going to take me next, and I appreciate you spending time checking out where I've been today. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, that was just so beautiful and moving and provocative. And I certainly have questions, but I want to open it up. I want to see who has questions. And before we do, though, I found something in the eLit studio. So before Amren's talk, we had a moment to talk about our entanglements. I mean, her talk was very much about embodied entanglement and ephemera and archiving. And when we were having coffee, I was asking her, because I know we've both been in the field of electronic literature and book history for 20-something years, where we met and how we became connected and our entanglement. And she told me that it was at UCLA, that you were getting your BA at UCLA, and I organized my first reading series at UCLA at the Hammer Museum in 2004. It was the first reading series that an LA museum's ever done on electronic literature. And she came. And I just want to acknowledge the entanglement, especially of women and feminist connections, because this was a reading series that was funded by Marjorie Loosbrink, who passed 2 years ago. She was a pioneer in electronic literature who I brought to state before COVID. And Kate Hales and Margie Loosbrink were the presidents of the Electronic Literature Organization. And they funded this reading series. They invested money in me to host a series. And Amaranth came and heard Stephanie Strickland. And thus begins a kind of entangled weaving. And this is the ephemera from that event that is in our studio. So I just want to share that because this now holds new meaning to me as a special place of inspiration for you as well.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have taken the artistic and intellectual path that I took if not for having attended that reading. Stephanie's work completely blew my mind. I ended up writing a paper about it in grad school. I think it was my first year of graduate school. None of the faculty I was working with knew the work. I felt like I was seeing something cutting edge, beautiful, thought-provoking, and it was a book that existed on the page and electronically. So it was 2 books in one. And you could read it from either cover to the center, and when you got to the center, there was a link taking you to the Viniverse website, which is a direct inspiration for Between Page and Screen, which happened many years later, but always stayed an important touchstone for me. And I wouldn't have done a dissertation about modernist poets and their relationship to writing technologies if I hadn't gotten onto that track of inspiration by artists of electronic literature showing me what was possible. So they're, for me, totally entangled and very much in the cosmic web of life. It was such an important moment for me.
That's incredible. I do want to invite people who have questions to ask questions, and I know we have a mic going around. Bill's up here, he has a question.
Okay. Is it?
Oh, right up here.
All right, sorry. So make sure you please speak into the microphone so everybody can hear, and we are recording this.
Sure. Check one. You should have had a trigger warning for that photo of your office, okay? Because that hurts.
I am so sorry for anyone who was hurt by looking at that. You are completely right. In the days after the fire, I sent photographs to some friends when I would come across their book in the pile, and I had to write and say, hey, this thing happened. I don't really even know how to talk about it, but I found your book and it's meaningful to me, and I would ask, do you want to see it? And I was really surprised. Everyone said yes, but I knew in that moment how painful it would be to look at, and I'm sorry for not warning you.
Okay, I have an actual question. So is ELIT the next step in the history of the book, or a prior step in the history of animation or television?
That's a great question, and I'll be curious what Jessica might say about that. I think that ELIT is both an important historical part of the book, and it's really important to acknowledge that electronic literature has been going on since the advent of computation, and really prior to that, if you look at all these earlier recombinant literary page-based forms. So the gesture towards the computational and electronic even precedes the digital. So I think it's really important to note that there's that long history prior to Gen AI of people who want to see how we can make texts that exceed the boundaries of the single author. But I also do think it's the future. And I do think that there is so much more interesting work being done and to be done as technologies change and as maybe audiences change too, that it seems to me like this, for a while, felt like a niche side practice, but seems like a really critical kind of literacy to have at this moment.
Can I follow up on that? Because the buzzword around here, and I think in most universities, is AI. And so I'm curious to hear what you think as someone who's been working with machines and humans in collaboration in the production and destruction of text and archives. How does AI factor into your thinking about your work and the production of poetry and literacy and literature? Does it change the way that we're thinking about this work? Does it make it more important?
I do sort of think it makes it more important because of the ways that the corporations that make AI are being allowed to frame the conversation about AI. I think that actually letting artists help frame that conversation gives us really important perspective and a more critical eye on what is possible and what is already happening. What do you think?
I love it. Totally agree. Yes. Other questions?
Sorry, there's only one of them today.
Okay. I have one comment that your office can't be worse than Bill's. Okay? Trust me on this one. And then I have sort of I don't want to say it's a silly question because you mentioned that it's not just the author, but it's the book publishers and the typesetters and things like that. And so it depends upon when you talk to people about their revenue streams for ebooks versus trade paperbacks versus hardbacks and things like that. And you talk about fonts, and a lot of the literary people tell me that Helvetica Neue is the preferred font, and the book publishers really like it when your drafts line up at the top and the bottom and stuff like that. By all means, talk about all those nasty little book publishers.
I'm not sure what to say. But I do think, like we've seen over time, I think one of the things that you're pointing out is how much writers actually care about what their work looks like, even in the drafting process. And one of the things we have to thank for that is computers, that as word processors made it easier and more possible for people to play. I mean, okay, no, that's a mistake, right? We have to thank typewriters and then computers, right? As it becomes more and more possible to manipulate the space of the page, more and more experimentation becomes possible. There isn't that delay, sending it out to a typesetter, getting it back. And I think it is worth noting that as what becomes available to us changes and the aesthetics of the work we make changes, we should be attentive to that and just watching, what are the book designs looking like these days? Are they all generic? Are they respecting the designs created by authors? How has the author thought about the way this is going to look on the page, and how does that shape the work's meaning too?
I saw Rachel and Joey had questions. Oh, and Joanna. Joanna has a question.
You spoke very beautifully about your feelings on ephemerality, especially with Between Page and Screen kind of going down for a number of years. So I'm curious, as you're thinking about your relationship with books, both through that tragedy and how you mentioned the relationship with Between Page and Screen, I'm curious how that has evolved now that it's back.
It's such a great question. The book was inaccessible and really out of reach for a number of years after the death of Flash. And Brad and I kept talking about it like, well, people still seem to want to talk about this book. People are publishing about this book. It seems a shame that they can't actually show the thing they're referencing in their work, even though historically, of course, throughout Fluxus and other art movements, people can write about things they didn't experience firsthand. And we had been doing other projects like Whispering Galleries, which was actually browser-based JavaScript AR, where Brad would say, oh, I think this technology gets us closer to a version of Between Page and Screen in the browser. And yet, we didn't actually make it happen. And it wasn't really, truly, actually possible to do it efficiently until last summer, which was a decade after the original publication of the book. Is that right?
More.
15 years after the publication of the book. So it felt like the right time, both because it was the book's anniversary and because of our catastrophic loss, and that feeling that this is something that actually doesn't have to stay lost. And with all the other things that we did lose, including the original artist books editions, which were in my office and got kind of melted into a shroud of bubble wrap, it felt right to kind of salvage something at that moment. Thanks for the question.
We're grateful that you did that. I'm very grateful. Rachel.
I had pretty much the same question, but I would love to add on, we really did have that experience here of having the physical book and like kind of trying to interpret it in that way of through the videos that we had access to. And I think that's a very cool experience to have had, especially having it eventually restored and getting to like finally read it as it was meant to originally. So like that was awesome. And thanks for coming. So I don't really have another question.
But that's great to hear, because that was like part of the original theoretical idea was like it's between, and how do we make people feel like neither one of these is the privileged artifact, but then will it privilege one artifact if the other one disappears? And so we had some really great conversations about it, and we like the idea that other people would have conversations like that. But it does also feel like a relief to be able to be with characters and poems that actually feel very meaningful to me and that otherwise wouldn't be available. Also, like, I don't know, there are many poets in this room, many creative writers in this room. It's very rare to feel that any of your work has meaning to other people. And so when someone takes an interest and really wants to spend time with your work, that's such a gift. And it really did inspire me so much to want to keep the work alive, knowing that there was still interest in looking at it and talking about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And while we're going to Joanna, I'll just say Rachel was one of the students with Joey that helped build this studio and archive.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you so much for this very beautiful talk. You mentioned entanglement, as a lovely and desirable outcome, and I'm fully on board. Does the term as sort of a conceptual desiderata is new to me. Does it have a genealogy for you? You know, whence entanglement?
So you are seated next to someone who knows much more than I do about quantum entanglement, Eva Avdezan, the artist. And I would say I come to know entanglement through Eva's work and through, quantum physics, which I know as a total neophyte, admirer of the notion that entanglement offers us a way of seeing ourselves in relation to others and always in relation to every being in the world. And it's a very humbling position to be in, and one that I feel coalesces with my sense of the desire to always be kind of stepping outside of myself or seeing through the eyes of or in relation with other folks. Jessica, you use the word entanglements too. Do you want to say something about it?
Well, now I'm eager to hear. Just from, certainly from theories of feminist theories and physics and we should pass it to.
Well, first of all, thank you for that incredibly beautiful talk. Very inspiring and very lovely to be able to take it in and get this, I know your work pretty well, but it's always a pleasure to hear an artist frame their work. So yeah, quantum entanglement. I don't know that I'm the expert on this, but I did a project, an electronic literature project called Collocations many years ago, which engaged with a book by Karen River Barad called Meeting the Universe Halfway. And in that book, they are a feminist theorist and particle physicist, and they wrote that book as a way to think about the philosophical implications of quantum physics across queer theory and ethics. And at the heart of that, or one of the things I took away, it's a very beautiful and dense book. They speak about, so quantum entanglement is basically the idea that, I also do not understand the physics, so disclaimers. But from what I do understand, it's when two particles are in a quantum relation where they can they're connected across distance in a way that defies common sense, and it is a facet of the way the universe works at subatomic levels, which is actually the way that it works at any level. And for me, one of the most salient points that Barad makes in that book is she uses the word, they use the word responsibility, like -ability, right? So the ability to respond, the need to respond, and understanding the world as interconnected, as a sort of call to ethics, and thinking about how we need to be in the world, how we need to care about each other in both the human world and beyond the human world.
And interaction instead of interaction, right? That
that's
things
the other
don't
one.
exist, they only exist in their entanglement. And talk about entanglement. You were at University of Washington?
Yes. So hi everybody. I'm an assistant professor here in the School of Art and Design, and I met Amaranth through the electronic literature community many years ago, and she encouraged me to apply to my first academic job. And I ended up as an artist in residence at University of Washington in Bothell and a colleague of Amaranth's, and that was the beginning of my academic career. So that's another entanglement here in the room. Very grateful for that.
And we'll still be presenting on electronic literature here in this room. Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions? Yeah, we got Veed, and then in the back. And there's JJ.
Hello. So I first learned about the concept of book work from your book, and particularly I'm interested in like objects made out of books, and I'm the literature versed, and like the book sculptures by like Detmer and Bayoubi. So I'm wondering how you see book work like that transforming as the book transforms to like more digital media.
Thank you for that question. I also am a big fan of book work. As someone who like started doing erasure, in middle school on random slips of paper that teachers would give me with like quizzes on them, I'd be like, oh, there's something in here that says something else if I just obliterate it. So yeah, there's something very viscerally pleasurable about creation through destruction for me. And that particular question, hits on the ephemerality or perceived ephemerality of material artifacts that directly leads to artists having access to tons of discarded library books, unwanted ephemera, works that are deemed no longer necessary because maybe even their content is considered out of date, right? Whether that's an encyclopedia or whether that's a book whose language doesn't adhere to our contemporary notions of, appropriate language use. And so as all of this, book and print culture becomes widely available, it can either be recycled or it can find new life through various artists' works. And I'm fascinated by that gesture, that desire to find something new hidden within, both, historically as a gesture of subversion. Very often in that kind of work, it's about subverting the original intention of this work, but also as a modality of grief. And this is something that Dr. Pressman writes about too, that in a way, working through these materials becomes a process of grieving their loss and their changing place in the kind of lineage of the book. Obviously, from those photos, it's clear that I'm entering my own grieving process for my lost library. And one of the reasons I did save volumes was that I realized they still meant something to me as partially destroyed objects and had the potential for transformation, but only if I actually kept the material artifact. So at first I just took photos. And I am not someone that people would describe as quote unquote woo-woo, but in the days after the fire, every single book of poetry in my office that I opened at random would open to a page with the words fire or water on it. Wow. I kid you not. And that probably says something about poets, right? Or the word lightning was in there too, for sure. And so I would take pictures of those pages. And at first I was like, okay, this is my project. And I was like, what am I gonna do? Sit in this crumbling room, sifting through and taking photos of things for like the rest of my life? I can't. This house is going to be condemned. It has to be totally dismantled. They have to get the debris out of this room. So I said, okay, I'll stop throwing things away and I'll put them in some U-Haul boxes and I'll see what I can do with them later. And later is now, and an unfolding, unknown durational timeline as I go through that process of reckoning with what those books can mean now. I hope that gets a little bit at your question. Thank you for that.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Hi. What's some advice I have for someone that is interested in creating their own e-literature?
Oh, well, are they in your class?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I love it, Genesis.
You've already taken the first most important step is studying with people who have been working in this field and who can connect you with other people in this field. There is an annual conference for an organization called the Electronic Literature Organization, of which Dr. Pressman was the president, and which this reading series that postcard is from was part of. They alternate between in-person conferences and online conferences. So the online conference is a really great way to get your foot in the door, connecting with other folks who could end up being your collaborators or your publishers. You can also, it seems like, get involved here on campus with Poetry International and their digital initiative, as well as this amazing space. Not every university has this. This is actually really incredible to have a space like this space that we're all sitting in, and also like that gallery space that is set up. That's really rare. To be able to get hands-on also with historical works as a way of kind of seeing where you want your work to fit in along this timeline is really important. while also looking at contemporary works and figuring out what are the questions. I feel like for me, when I do a project that has technology in it, because I also write for the page and make artist books, my mediated work is always thinking about a question, or using that extra layer of mediation is often about helping me ask a question. So part of it might also be figuring out what are the questions that are pressing to you, and how do you start investigating those questions through your electronic practice. I also, as Dr. Pressman mentioned, I'm an inveterate collaborator, and I believe fully that if you don't already know how to do something, you can learn, but you can also find someone else who knows and be in dialogue with another person. And I always find that my work is so much better for being made with another person and being, a chance to learn from their experience, to try on some of their approaches, and to see through another person's eyes.
Well, I'm sorry, but I have to end us here. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank Amaranth for just a truly inspiring, soul-enriching, beautiful, really gorgeous talk. Thank you for being here. Thank all of you for being here.
Thank you so much.